Israel's war on Gaza is the first genocidal campaign whose consequences have been live streamed around the world. For 3 months now, Palestinian journalists and citizens have been uploading images and videos showing the horror raining down on them. The world has now seen countless images of people killed in airstrikes, children maimed by war, and the videos of people mourning entire families killed by the IDF. But there is another set of images and videos being uploaded from the Gaza Strip. Those from Israeli soldiers themselves. And the tone could not be more different. Now, in this TikTok clip, an Israeli soldier gives a thumbs up as he drives a bulldozer down a street in northern Gaza, pushing a battered car towards a collapsed building. The caption reads, "I stopped counting how many neighborhoods I've erased." This next clip shows an Israeli soldier putting his feet up in a destroyed Palestinian home. It was uploaded with a parody version of the Israeli song "This Was My Home," which was featured in an Israeli comedy sketch and, according to the New York Times, has spread online among Israeli social media users, making fun of Palestinians. Another song widely used by Israelis on TikTok is a remix called Shtayim Shalosh Shager, or 2-3 Launch. Here you can see soldiers dancing on camera. And in this song, when the word launch is heard, the video cuts to a shot of a building being blown up. IDF combat engineers have been particularly busy on TikTok, uploading light-hearted videos which show them destroying entire Palestinian communities and civilian buildings. Here, the engineers smoke hookah pipes and make a toast as they blow up 4 residential blocks. In another video uploaded to TikTok, Israeli soldiers dedicate the bulldozing of a building to Eyal Golan. He's the Israeli singer who called for the complete destruction of Gaza.
אייל גולן, אח שלנו היקר, אוהבים אותך מצמא. מלב חנונס, כל הבית הזה בשבילך על מה שאתה עושה לנו כל השמחה. עם ישראל חי! All those videos uploaded by IDF soldiers to social media were featured in a report in the New York Times. That's a paper which is generally fairly pro-Israel. Before that, some were referenced. So before it was featured in the New York Times, some of those had been referenced by South African lawyers at the International Court of Justice, who used them examples of the genocidal culture within Israeli troops, which comes from the top, as the South African lawyers also showed with regard to statements coming from Israel's leaders. The IDF have, as you can imagine, distanced themselves from the soldiers making those posts. In a written statement to the New York Times, they said this: "The conduct of the force that emerges from the footage is deplorable and does not comply with the army's orders." However, and this won't surprise you, that statement doesn't seem entirely genuine. This is from Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper. Israeli army admits running unauthorized graphic Gaza influence op. They say an IDF psychological warfare unit ran a Telegram channel targeting Israeli audience without approval. The army initially denied involvement, but an internal investigation following Haaretz's expose revealed its involvement. Now, the Telegram channel referred to here was called 72 Virgins Uncensored, and it was operated by members of the IDF's Operations Directorate. This is from the Haaretz report. The channel's administrators posted graphic content such as images of the dead bodies of Hamas terrorists captioned "Shatter the Terrorist Fantasy" on a daily basis. On several occasions, they posted exclusive material from investigations or information that was only available to the defense establishment at the time, boasting it was exclusive from Gaza. They uploaded thousands of videos and still images of the killing of terrorists and destruction in the Strip and encouraged the channel's followers to share the content so that everyone can see we're screwing them. Of course, I'm reading from Haaretz here, so whether you would consider these people terrorists or militants or just civilians who have been falsely targeted is up to you. Moving on, though, the operators used coarse language in a bid to obscure the IDF's involvement in the channel. An October 11th post read, "Burning their mother, you won't believe the video we got. You can hear their bones crunch. We'll post it right away, get ready." Photos of Palestinian men captured by the IDF in the Strip and the bodies of terrorists were captioned, quote, "Exterminating the roaches, exterminating the Hamas rats, share this beauty." A video of a soldier allegedly dipping machine bullets in pork fat is captioned, quote, "What a man, greases bullets with lard,
you won't get your virgins. Another caption was, garbage juice, another dead terrorist. You have to watch it with the sound. You'll die laughing. I mean, this is just disgusting for anyone to be posting this. But what's really interesting here, I think, is that this was run by IDF operatives. And what you're seeing here, what it explicitly says in this Haaretz article, is that one of the reasons they made this sort of so explicit and so gruesome is because they wanted it to seem unofficial. You know, they wanted it to seem organic and grassroots. And they wanted it to seem organic and grassroots because they wanted this spread around Israel. So this idea, you know, that, oh, we're trying to discourage soldiers from sort of celebrating the destruction of Gaza and civilian infrastructure. You've got a unit within the IDF, like high up in the IDF, within the directorate, who is running this Telegram channel, which is precisely intended to sort of seed dehumanizing footage into the Israeli public. They're sort of telling IDF soldiers, share this with everyone. And, you know, that is not the sign of a government that is trying to rein in the genocidal tendencies in the population. Or, I mean, it seems to be genocidal tendencies in the population at the moment. This seems to be a leadership of the IDF which is trying to exploit the genocidal sort of inclinations of the Israeli public right now. You know, they are trying to put fuel to the fire, not trying to restrain it. And we can show you some screenshots from the chat as well. They were shared by research analyst Nax Bilal on Twitter. Now, one video showed IDF soldiers who desecrated a mosque in Jenin singing Hanukkah songs over the mosque speakers. Bilal says the IDF went on to suspend several of the perpetrators, but shared the content on their Psy-Op channel anyway. This post in the chat gloats about the destruction of a mosque. You can see all the emoji reacts underneath. Lots of love hearts, thumbs up, a poo emoji there. And this next clip is a classic style of video coming from the IDF at the moment. It shows the destruction of Gaza alongside what my producer tells me is called big room house music. Femi, I want your thoughts on this. I mean, there's some obvious things to say, which is sort of the idea that the Israelis are really trying to rein in these tendencies of their soldiers, I think, is for the birds. And we are being sold that sort of in the West. That, oh, no, this is a very humanitarian war. Of course it's not. I kind of think, though, in a way, you know, that this is what war is like, right? I think that we sort of have a tendency, and we have managed as a society to say, oh no, war, you know, soldiers are going to be walking around sort of miserable, or, you know, I had to shoot him, but I didn't want to. You know, these are young men and young women in the IDF, you know, who have for their, you know, whole life been dehumanizing these people. It's not surprising. And I can kind of imagine, you know, I'm sure if, you know, the American troops in Vietnam also had TikTok, they would be uploading similar things, which absolutely is not to justify it. It's just to say, when you fight a genocidal war, this is the kind of thing you should expect. People who pretend that you can have this clinical war, I think, are fooling themselves.
I'm glad you qualified that, because first you said this is what war is like, and then you said when you have this type of genocidal war, and there's a distinction, of course, which you've highlighted there. There's a war where you're scared and where you actually think that you are possible. I mean, and some troops in Gaza, Israeli troops in Gaza, will be scared because the resistance that is there. They're also getting picked off from time to time. But nonetheless, the genocidal aspect of this is more important, because when you look at historical genocides that are labeled as genocides and not kind of obfuscated and called wars in order to kind of justify them to some degree, because the first thing that happened when all these bombardments started to drop, what happened? It was called the Israel-Hamas War. Because a war is acceptable. A war has different rules to play. When you're in a war, you're not necessarily subject to some of the same restrictions that you are outside of a war, which meant that the international community didn't have to respond in the same way that they should have responded. And we know that they didn't necessarily respond as quickly as they should have to the Rwandan genocide, but the Rwandan genocide was seen for what it was, straight out of the bag. And in the Rwandan genocide, one of the main things, of course, was the dehumanization of the ethnic group being targeted. This rhetoric of cockroaches, this rhetoric of rats, this rhetoric, it's the same thing happened in the Holocaust. It's a necessary part, because human nature is very malleable. Human nature is very flexible. But in order to have your populace kind of back you whilst you're doing these things, whilst you're bombing to death tens of thousands of children, you need to radicalize your populace. And this is what we've seen. Israel has this rhetoric where it claims that Palestinians radicalize their children. It even uses it to justify killing Palestinian children. It says, well, these Palestinian snake children are just going to grow up to be terrorists like their parents. They're giving guns in school. They're giving this, that, and the rest. But as far as I checked, Palestine doesn't have a policy, or even Gaza doesn't have a policy where every single Palestinian young person, upon kind of getting to adult age, is forced to be conscribed into Hamas, whereas Israel does have this policy. There's particular exemptions for Orthodox Jews, which themselves, like large parts of Israeli society, are against these exemptions and say, no, Orthodox Jews should have to fight in the IDF like the rest of us. But it's a society which funnels you into the military, and we can see now that this is a military which espouses radical views. And so this is part of the reason why, even within the West, countries like Britain, we see this huge push against the Zionist narrative. We see this huge rallying cry against. We see that large portions of the population, even if the governments are supporting Israel, large portions of the population are turning against this. The AP did a poll a few days ago, I believe, that said half of US adults say Israel has gone too far in the war. In January, we saw other polls from Haaretz that said 75% of Jewish Israelis reject the idea of shifting the war from the strategy of kind of heavy bombardment on civilian areas to targeting the Hamas leadership in a more precise way. And part of that is because the Israeli state knows that it has to radicalize its population. It's a settler colonial population. What does settler colonialism mean? It means that part of the goal is to put guns in the hand of citizens and say, you go and do part of our job for us. They've invited over random white South Africans who've converted to Judaism, who don't actually have any kind of Jewish history, because they know that they're good at this kind of thing and they have a history with apartheid. When you really look at this, it's not surprising that Israel is involved in this kind of Psy-Op operation. It's not surprising that one of the most popular songs in Israel for many weeks was a drill song, successfully appropriating Black British culture, that called for the death of Mia Khalifa and celebrated the genocide. It's not surprising that on my Twitter timeline, I'm seeing videos of Israeli soldiers advertising their barbershops whilst standing next to the corpses of dead Palestinian civilians. What it is doing is it's because it's being live streamed to the world, is affecting the public imagination globally on what Israeli citizens are actually like, and what the public mood in Israel is itself. Obviously, perceptions are going to change on a populace when you see that that populace is more interested in blocking aid trucks to starving children than it is to protesting and pushing against the people doing the starving of these children. But yeah, it's a tale as old of time. If you as a state are going to commit a genocide, then you have to corrupt the minds of your own citizens. You have to turn your citizens into the worst versions of themselves. And it's something which is really sad and disheartening to see.
It was Vincent Bevin's latest book, actually, where he is talking about sort of the hopes that people had about social media. And I think it was Gordon Brown, who I'm not sure when he said it, but sort of said, we couldn't have had, I think it was sort of Arab Spring time, sort of 2010-ish. He said, if there had been smartphones during the Rwandan genocide, it would have been stopped before that many people got killed. And because the idea being the only way you can carry out a genocide is in darkness, where no one can see it. So if these images are being uploaded, it wouldn't happen anymore. What do you think about that sort of assessment? Do you think that sort of this has shown that, you know, people are very capable of ignoring images coming out of a genocidal situation?
People are capable of ignoring images coming out of a genocidal situation. And I think some people are capable of watching those images, happily watching those images, and just keeping quiet about what they really think about them. I do think that there are some Islamophobes in the UK, in the US, who watch these videos and think, oh, okay, well, fine, good. And not to say that to the same extent, but we know that the UK and the US have big populations of people who don't like Muslims, big populations of people who buy into narratives about overpopulation, especially big populations of people who are going to be saying things like, oh, well, why are all of these kind of Muslims and these Africans having all these kids and have all these high birth rates, and we're not having our own, and the narrative of kind of like white genocide and the rest. And so I think, yes, social media does expose the truth more, and it becomes more difficult to obfuscate what's going on, and it becomes more difficult for those people of good conscience, and there are a lot of good people of good conscience in the Western world, to look away, although some of them will still look away. And then if you look away, are you really a person of good conscience? That's a different question. But at the same time, that isn't to say, as has been highlighted here, historically dehumanization and currently dehumanization is also a tactic. And when they are publishing these videos, they're publishing them for their audience, which is an audience of of racists and supremacists. Some people, of course, will be lapping it up. But thankfully, I think as well, we've seen that it's a mountain of evidence. So if the world ever decides to actually start following international law and enforcing it, no one can say the evidence is not there, because the Israeli soldiers have been publishing it themselves.